What's up, guys? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of our videos. Also, make sure you follow us all over social media so you don't miss any of our content or show announcements. So the next two teams that have been big surprises in the early part of the season, a couple of things that make it difficult to interpret. For instance, the Cleveland Cavaliers have 17 wins, but only 4 of them have been against teams that are currently 500 or better, which makes them difficult to interpret. And then the Golden State Warriors are 12-5 in the Western Conference. Do you give either of those teams a real chance to win 4 playoff rounds based on what you've seen from them here in the early going?
The Warriors, I think no. They're the easier answer to me because I feel like the Warriors are getting by with depth and with like 11-man lineups. And Cleveland is too, by the way. Like that's an underrated thing that's happening with the Cavs. Like their bench has been unbelievable to this point, led by Ty Jerome. But like the Warriors, it feels like are getting by with just like a ton of really smart basketball players that know how to play the game, that know how to run that scheme. And I don't even know that they necessarily have unbelievable ways to like match up with you. Like they don't have an enormous front line, right? Like Trayce Jackson-Davis is an undersized center. Kevon Looney probably isn't like totally undersized, but Kevon Looney just like might not be good enough anymore to like anchor a defense. So they're almost always going to have to go small, right? In order to get the most out of their lineups. And if you go small against, for instance, the Denver Nuggets, if you go small against this iteration of the Oklahoma City Thunder, I think you're going to have problems now because they can go big against you and they can go Hartenstein and Chet once we see Chet back. And that's a whole other thing. Like, what is Chet going to be once he gets back? From what I understand about the hip injury, it's one of those hip injuries that from what I understand, it's just like a pain thing. It's not something that will like inflict upon his mobility moving forward, or like even once he heals from it. It's just literally like when the pain stops kind of thing. And once the injury itself, the fracture heals, right? So I think he'll be back.
Pain from fractures for a while too.
Yeah, like I think he'll be back this year. It's just like, look, I can't sit here and tell you like the level that he's definitely going to be back at. But that, what I will say about Chet is like, you know, people look at him, he's missed his whole rookie season. He's going to miss a portion of this year now. Don't mistake that with like a lack of toughness necessarily. Like he suffered a serious injury in that Pro-Am game. He suffered a serious injury where he fractured that bone in his hip or whatever in this game against the Golden State Warriors, who we're talking about, and Andrew Wiggins. So don't mistake that though with a lack of toughness. Like Chet Holmgren will get out there and play. He will play through the pain. Like if Oklahoma City allows him, it's just whether or not he's going to be able to or not. Don't take that, you know, one way or another in terms of his lack of pain tolerance. On the Warriors, I just don't know that they have enough talent. It's kind of where I'm at with them. Like they have a lot of depth. They have a lot of interesting depth. The cool thing about them is that if a star comes available for whatever reason this season, they are very well positioned to be able to go get that star if they want to extend out the Stephen Curry window. They have Jonathan Kuminga, who they decided not to extend, which makes him a potential trade target. They have all of their picks moving forward, which gives them a number of potential avenues to create deals. Even somebody I think like Cam Johnson would really help them immensely, just in terms of offensive flow, structure, consistent spacing when Buddy Hield isn't on the court. Buddy Hield started the season incredibly well over his last 6 or 7 games. He's cooled way off, and he's really hard to have out there defensively. So there are matchups where he's going to have it. There are going to be nights where he has it. But what do you do when he doesn't have it? Is a big question for Golden State on offense for me right now. I mean, where do you fall on them? Let's start with them before we go to the Cavs here.
I found the Warriors to be kind of proof of concept of a couple of key things that you and I both believe in at a really high level in terms of our kind of like basketball worldview.
Yeah.
And like you said, depth, I think it's not just depth, it's a depth of a specific type of player, which is like a fast player who's pretty good at everything. Like not necessarily like there's
thinks fast.
Yes,
is the
that
big thing
thinks
with them.
fast. Exactly. And like I've thought so much about just kind of the way the game has changed, particularly in the regular season. And I'm glad you mentioned that there's a talent limit there, because this has been something that's been a difficult pill for some Warriors fans to swallow over the course of the start of the season. And I don't blame them, because every fan base can get a little bit arrogant when their team starts to rack up wins. But like there is a certain type of game that Golden State can play that chews and spits teams out, in terms of the way that they pressure the ball, in terms of the way that they fly around and rotate. They have some of the sharpest closeouts I see in the league come out of Golden State, and their ability to defend the 3-point line while also offering help. It's a principle that I believe in very strongly now, which is that the best foundational like trait that any roster can have is to have a bunch of big athletes on the perimeter that compete. And I think like specifically on the perimeter that can cover ground and that play hard. You need a good variety too of like different sizes and types, but you need that type of trait. I would argue, besides foundational superstar, of which there's only 4 or 5 in the entire league, that's the most important thing you can have, is a trove of athletes. Would you agree at that point as the number one roster trait?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I'll give you an example. Like Atlanta this year has been like pretty feisty and competitive for the most part, despite not having DeAndre Hunter and Bogdan Bogdanovic for like a majority of the year, right? I know that they've lost like 3 in a row and like they haven't played super well over the course of the last week, but like that's a team that is feisty, and in large part their biggest additions this summer were Dyson Daniels, Zachary Rissachet, guys that are feisty, that are long, that can cover ground defensively. Like those guys really help, I think, in terms of what Atlanta is looking to do with, surrounding Trae Young with talent, right? Trae Young is probably not one of those foundational superstars, but he is somebody that is an incredible offensive talent, and having those guys around him allows him just to go and be like, hey, create the offense every night. Please don't be a total sieve on defense. And, we trust that we'll be able to rack, maybe not a 500 team, but we might get to 35 to 40 wins, maybe. The antithesis of this is another team that I'm sure we'll talk about today, the Bucks, right? The Bucks have really struggled with that, and that's a big reason why, on some level, they are playing below their talent level, even though Giannis, over the last, I would argue, 2.5, 3 weeks, this might be the best I've ever seen Giannis play on offense, just point blank. He's been
so good.
Otherworldly. You can maybe say the final series against the Suns, and I would hear that out as well. But like what he's adding now is the mid-range jumper and it's a totally different beast to deal with Giannis. So the fact that they don't have that foundational perimeter skill and speed and understanding of how to close out onto shooters, that is a critical thing that they're missing right now. And they need to go out and find that at the trade deadline, before the trade deadline, frankly, hopefully.
One of the things I've appreciated with the Bucks is like they kind of have found it a little bit. They found a little bit of a baseline for them for 48 minutes at the point of attack between Ajax and AJ Green, who I actually think has done a pretty damn good job guarding the ball. And
AJ Green's good.
He's converting spot ups at like damn near 1.5 per possession. So like they kind of have like found their little formula there, where shout out to Brook and Giannis, by the way. Those two guys have had a flashback defensive stretch here over the last couple of weeks. Nothing like a disastrous 2-8 start to kind of like to kick you in the butt a little bit and get you moving. But like, yeah, that has become my biggest. You and I have talked about this at various points over the course of the last few years, and it's manifested in different like kind of like buzzwords. But I remember for you, it was ground coverage. That was the thing that you said to me in our postseason kind of conversation last year. And for me, I've been referring to it as perimeter athleticism, but it basically means the exact same thing. But I viewed that as like the baseline. And then the second piece of it, and I think some of the success that Dallas has had without Luka in the last couple of weeks has been a great example of this, is creating space by allowing your big men to operate as screening and passing fulcrums from the perimeter rather than occupying space around the rim. And this has been a Golden State staple for over a decade now, but this is something we've seen all around the league. Dallas, when they are trying to run offense with Luka off the floor, it's a lot of lively at the top of the key with guards screening for each other and cutting off of them. They ran a blender possession against the Nuggets when they beat them the other night, where they had Kyrie come running off of a Derek Lively dribble handoff at the top, but it was a fake. He didn't get it. Then Quentin Grimes came flying off the dribble handoff. He did get it. As he got it, Lively rolled, but then as he rolled, he kind of dragged Jamal Murray into the paint. Najee Marshall relocated to the top, got a little closeout opportunity, beat Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray, by the way, some of the worst defense I've seen ever from a player in the last couple of games from him. It's like his little comment that he threw out. That this was part of my video that I recorded today that just disappeared into the ether. But Jamal Murray had a. Yeah, for the Hoops Tonight listeners, I did work today. You're just not going to see the video because it doesn't exist anymore. We had a little Mac crisis today. But anyway, Jamal Murray went out and started talking shit about his teammates partying in Los Angeles, and then was the reason why they got eviscerated by the Knicks. But anyway, my basketball worldview has come around to this idea that if you are not creating space around the rim by using your bigs further away from the rim as screening and passing fulcrums, if you are not getting the ball side to side, if you do not have multiple ball handling threats on the floor, there's a ceiling to your offense, especially when you get to the late playoff rounds. It's something that I feel very, very passionately about. And ironically, it kind of bridges the gap to Cleveland, because in the same way that Golden State to me is proof of concept of two ideas, which is that offensive organization piece I was just talking about and that perimeter athleticism piece, the Cavs to me are kind of another example of Kenny Atkinson bringing a lot of the same ideologies to Cleveland in terms of how to play offense, how to defend as well with the switching and containing. But staying on Golden State for a second, to put it very simply, right now, there's way too much Andrew Wiggins needs to be our savior for this thing to work out. And he's been playing really well. I pulled this stat on my mythological show that existed earlier today. I said that Andrew Wiggins had played 4 games in a row and scored 20 plus points for the first time since May of 2021 in this recent stretch. And he only had 18 in the loss to Brooklyn last night, but the previous 4 games, he's been playing really, really well. And I've been saying the Warriors need specifically a front court type of player who can pretty reliably get them to 20 points a game efficiently and can create his own shot without having to rely on Steph. And one of the things that's happening is, and this is where it went off the rails for them in the Brooklyn game last night, is their bench units really struggle to score unless Buddy Hield's just making everything. And Buddy Hield, even when he was hot, was making a lot of pretty tough, tightly contested shots. And so my thing is there's a lot of guys who can get hot, Lindy Waters can get hot and make shots. He's a little bit of a movement shooter, right? Jonathan Kuminga can go for 25, 30 on any given night. Buddy Hield obviously can get hot and make shots. Brandon Podziemski can get hot and he can make shots. What they don't have is a guy who's kind of a more consistent night-to-night shot creator. And what scares me for them in the big picture is I look around the league and I'm okay, Jimmy Butler makes some sense, but I don't know if he's even got the juice in the tank left. Brandon Ingram, I think, might be a little bit too methodical and a little bit too much of a ball stopper to make that work. Zach LaVine, the salary, and the concerns about his health. Is there even a player that you see as a realistic trade target that could move Golden State into that tier for you?
I don't know that I have an answer to that. Unfortunately, Jimmy is the answer to me. I think Jimmy can get ball stoppy, but he also, feel like I'm on Seinfeld right now. Jimmy can get ball stoppy, but Jimmy can do that. But I think that when he's within a scheme and within a flow, he's more than happy to play within that, right? I don't know if Jimmy's going to be available. The Miami Heat are a team that constantly tries to contend. The only reason that he would be potentially available is if they just decide, you know what, he's a free agent, he's not re-signing, this, that, and the other thing, right? And they're out of it by February. That feels unlikely to me. It's not impossible by any stretch, but I think they're going to be competitive enough to where they're going to feel like they can make a playoff run with Eric Spoelstra, with Jimmy Butler, and give this team one final rodeo and chance at it with the Jimmy and Bam core. I don't know that it would be that expensive necessarily to go get Jimmy Butler for 5 months, 4 months, maybe
They'd
a couple of first round picks.
Wiggins though. Would that change it for you? Just from the standpoint of matching salaries, from what I understand, it'd be Wiggins or no?
I would still do it if I was them. You're getting Jimmy Butler. And honestly, with Wiggins, if you could parlay this great stretch of games into getting
value,
off of that but more than anything, like getting off that contract, which this summer looked like it would be unmovable or like immovable, whatever that word is. That is something I would probably do if I was them. I would have to think about that, like in terms of, is that true or not? I would guess that it is, off the top of my head, but I'm sure that that's right. Now I'm trying to think, like, could you like Melton's deal plus like a few other kind of things, but I'd have to really kind of dive into it. And it'd probably have to involve a third team as well. You might be able to get there, but it'd be
tough fall off. Wiggins makes 26, but after Draymond, you got Melton at 12, Peyton at 9, Kyle Anderson at 9, Buddy Hield at 9, Kevon Looney at 8. So like you could piece together deals, but you would give up a couple of your key role players. The way I put it on my show is like, I think it's a February decision. Like, yeah, I think if you get to February and Wiggins is more or less the same player he's been for the last couple of years, and Jimmy Butler looks like he's got some juice, but the Heat are floundering in the play-in again in a terrible Eastern Conference, then you call him up and you see if you can't work something out and you try to make a run at it. But like if Wiggins goes for 20 plus in 2/3 of his games for the next 2 months, then I think you have to kind of approach it in a different way. But yeah, with Golden State for me, like I think here's where I'm at with Golden State. I think that they are certain to finish above the play-in as long as Steph stays healthy because of that floor that we talked so much about in terms of their perimeter athleticism and scheme. But I don't take them seriously as like a top-tier championship contending threat unless they get a legitimate number 2 next to Steph. Because, again, every other team we're talking about just has so much more firepower at the top. It's like not even close. And so that's where I get concerned.